Day 2 of the NHL Draft has gone about as slow as day 1 of the NHL Draft, but we have a few trades to announce today that I really wanted to talk about, including John Gibson to the Detroit Red Wings, Jordan Spence to the Ottawa Senators, and more. So today we're going to be breaking down all of these draft trades to see which teams won, which teams lost, and what I think of all of these deals. So make sure you watch till the end for all the trade analysis and hit that subscribe button, because we're going to be cranking out the content over these next few days with the draft and free agency as well. And let's get right into it. Starting us out, let's get into the first day 2 trade of the bunch involving the Ottawa Senators and the LA Kings and involving defenseman Jordan Spence, who has been in rumors, I think, for a few weeks now, especially as LA looks to change over that defense. Ken Holland coming in as a new GM, wanting to rejuvenate that team a little bit. Jordan Spence just kind of felt like the odd man out, especially in that Kings defense core. And I'll be honest, I completely get it from LA's perspective. He's not a bigger player. He doesn't play very big, so he doesn't really fit that LA Kings system very well. The big problem to me, though, is that I think Spence is a pretty undervalued player because even though he's not the biggest guy in the world, he always drives pretty good results in all three zones. Even though he is a smaller player and doesn't play very physical, I think he's a pretty smart defensive player, even if he's not going to be really the name of the game when it comes to him. It's just the smarts in all three zones, though, that I think what is really what Spence's value comes from. But you can see over the past couple of seasons, the point production, not too bad as well for somebody that doesn't play a ton of minutes in LA. This last year in 79 games, got 28 points, 24 assists. For a team like Ottawa especially, that I think could always use some more depth on the right side of the defense, I think Spence could come in and actually play a decent amount of minutes and do a pretty good job at doing so. Ottawa already has a ton of size all throughout that D-core, but I think they could use just that little extra bit of puck movement and competitiveness, and I think Spence is going to be able to bring that. He's not going to be this overwhelmingly big physical presence, but I don't think Ottawa's defense necessarily needs that right now. In Spence's case, I think he's going to be able to move the puck well, get out of the defensive zone efficiently, and that efficiency, I think, is something that Ottawa's defense does need. And especially at 24 years old, he lines up pretty well, actually, with the rest of the younger players on that team, but also doesn't really play very young, in my opinion. So I think for Ottawa especially, this was a home run move to make, especially for what it ended up costing them, which wasn't really that much in the end. As Puck Report goes on to say, the Sens have acquired Jordan Spence, and the pick exchange is that 67th overall selection and a 2026 6th round pick. So really, when you think about it, not all that crazy. Now, I don't know, you guys can correct me in the comments, I don't know if that was the 3rd round pick the Sens got by trading back and then getting Logan Hensler at 23rd overall. It might have been, so I think in that case too, basically a free extra 3rd round pick for a player like Spence for just a 6th rounder. I mean, to me, I just find no way to really hate this deal for the Sens. From the Kings' perspective, I get that Spence really didn't have much of a long-term view there, especially as his role kind of got enveloped by a player like Brandt Clarke. So I completely understand why this was the case, why they ended up dealing him. It's just a shame, man, because LA has had some really good defensemen they've traded recently. Spence, of course, is a solid one, but a player like Sean Durzi as well. There's been a lot of casualties that I think are kind of unforced errors, but we'll have to wait and see how this one pans out for them. In terms of the trade grades, I'm going to give the Ottawa Senators a straight A. Again, not really much to complain about. It might be an A+, honestly, for how solid of a fit Jordan Spence, I think, can be for that Ottawa team. For LA, I understand why they made the move. It's not a move that I personally want to make, but I understand it. So I'm going to give LA a B-. Again, not great, but at the end of the day, I don't think Spence had a major role there going forward. So at that point, why not ship him out? But I will say, between getting Logan Hensler, trading down to get Logan Hensler, and getting a player like Jordan Spence for the future, I actually really like this draft for the Ottawa Senators, which is not something I typically say. Sens fans know that pretty well. But hey, when they make a good trade, they make a good trade, and I have to give them credit for it. Now let's go into the second deal of the day. This one was a little bit more curious to me in a lot of different ways. It's not, I don't think, as big as the Jordan Spence deal, but for both Buffalo and Pittsburgh, it's a fascinating one. We saw the Penguins acquire pick 39 in the NHL Draft, and then Connor Clifton from the Buffalo Sabres, and Buffalo ended up getting Connor Timmins and Isaac Beliveau, 2 defensemen added to that pool. Now, in the end, at 39th overall, the Pittsburgh Penguins end up selecting WHL big-time 6'5" defenseman Peyton Kittles. I think he's fine. I think at best, he's probably a number 6, number 7 defenseman, but very physical, really is able to take away a lot of space, so there could be a future defenseman there. Not a super high-end one, but still a potential piece. So basically in this trade, it's young defenseman and defenseman for young defenseman and young defenseman at the end of the day. Putting it in that context, it's a bit of a strange one. I will say from Buffalo's perspective, getting rid of Connor Clifton is just a good thing. Connor Clifton is not good, but he will help Pittsburgh's tank next season for Gavin McKenna. So there is that, of course. I do think in Timmins' case, he's somebody that is kind of up that Jordan Spence alley where he's always drove some pretty decent results. I thought was okay for Pittsburgh once he got traded there in the second half of last season. Wasn't too bad. So maybe he's a third pair option for Buffalo. I think having more options on the right side of the defense isn't a bad thing for a Buffalo team that needs more options there, more NHL ready candidates. So at the end of the day, I don't think it's a horrible deal for either team. And if Pittsburgh really thinks Kettles has a future, then I think it rounds out pretty well. I will say at the end of the day, I think for Buffalo, just getting rid of Connor Clifton is the big thing. And I think Timmins is a better player than Clifton, even though I don't think he's nearly as physical as a player like Clifton is. The rest of the game, I think, is a lot smarter with how they both process it. So I think in Buffalo's case, they likely get the biggest upside here in terms of the players, the NHL players coming back. But again, for Pittsburgh, stocking up that prospect cover, getting a second-round pick, you're taking a contract like Connor Clifton, you're not going to be good next year anyways, so why not make that type of deal? For both teams, honestly, I'm going to give them a straight B, just a solid trade from both sides. I think on Pittsburgh's perspective, though, a lot of this does depend on how Peyton Kettles does develop. But of course, you get a big physical defenseman into that pool, so it's not the worst thing in the world. And again, for both these teams, especially for Pittsburgh, it really doesn't matter much bringing on a cap hit like that. You get an early second-round pick for a player like Timmins and Beliveau. I mean, at that point, that's an easy trade to make. And then we go on to the big one here with the Detroit Red Wings going after one of the big name goaltenders on the market in John Gibson from the Anaheim Ducks. Now, I'm going to be honest, I didn't actually think that John Gibson was going to get dealt, even though about him for the last 5 years. That's honestly why I thought he was just going to stay in Anaheim, because he stayed in Anaheim this long. Why not keep him there? But of course, with Lukas Dostal becoming the #1 there in Anaheim pretty definitively, there really wasn't that much room for John Gibson long-term to be the starter there in net for Anaheim unless some disastrous injuries were to happen. So going to Detroit, I think, is pretty good for John Gibson. And if he does play like he did in 2025, then I think Detroit could be onto something here. And then we get the official confirmation here from Frank Seravalli giving us the entire details, with John Gibson going to the Red Wings in exchange for goaltender Peter Mrazek, a 2027 second-round pick, and a 2026 fourth rounder. And then goes on to say, no salary retained in this Yzerman-Verbeek transaction. And I will say this, that I think for a lot of people, the return might be a bit less than what people are expecting, but the reason is because of what Frank Seravalli says there at the bottom, with no salary retention. John Gibson doesn't make an overwhelming amount of money, but it's still a decent amount for the term he has as well. So I think in Detroit's case, it's not a steal by any means getting that type of cap hit on the board. He has a lot of potential to be what Detroit needs, but is still a gamble and a half. Gibson's a weird one, because I don't know if I would bet on him to be the full-time starter in Detroit, because he hasn't been at least at a good level as a starter in a long time, in my opinion. Making $6.4 million, he's something that's been super up and down in terms of his career. Was one of the best goaltenders, in my opinion, coming into the 2020s. You see the last couple of years there, 2018, 2019, fantastic numbers for an Anaheim team that was kind of all over the place as well in terms of their play. But in the 2020s, it's just not been a good stretch for him. He's had a couple of good stretches to start out a couple of seasons here and then, but just hasn't consistently been the starter that Anaheim has needed. This year, though, playing the least amount of games that he's played since, 2015, he actually did play pretty well, getting a .912 save percentage and a .277 goals against average in 29 games. The problem is, that's his best play because he wasn't playing as much. And I think for Gibson, that was honestly a good thing for him that a player like Lukas Dostal came in, took over that starter role, and honestly gave Gibson a bit of a break for once. Maybe that's what he needed, just to be a starter again, as just a year break to really cool things down for a little bit. But I wouldn't expect Detroit to get a slam dunk goaltender here, because again, he hasn't been great as a starter since at least 2019. So for him to be a sure bet, it is a massive risk, but among this goalie market that was extremely dry, John Gibson was probably the best out there. But that contract really is what worries me here, because you pay $6.4 million for the next 2 seasons after this last year. So it's not the biggest amount of term. He only has 2 years left, but it is still a pretty high AAV for something that I don't think can definitively be your 1A starter. So we'll have to wait and see. I'm really rooting for John Gibson, honestly, because these last few years have been a tough stretch for him, I'm sure, mentally, and that's why we've seen so many trade rumors and so much speculation around him. I just hope that in a change of scenery, going to a team that will give him the opportunity to be the #1 guy, that he'll feel refreshed, he'll actually feel like he belongs, that it could be his home long term, and I do hope it works out for him, because John Gibson has deserved a lot more than what this Anaheim team has given him in terms of the teams in front of him over these last few years, and deserves some competency. Playing with Ben Chiarot might not give him that completely, but hopefully it's at least an upgrade. I gotta say, though, I absolutely adore this for the Anaheim Ducks. I mean, it's not the most insane return in the world, but it frees up a ton of cap room, plus a 2nd-round pick is fine, 4th-rounder is fine, and I think also getting Peter Mrazek, he's not, the best goaltender in the world or anything, but it'll be fun, I think, for a player like Lukas Dostal to have a veteran Czech goaltender, Czech goalie legend behind him. I mean, Mrazek is just so much fun and always has been, even though I don't think he's the most dependable guy in the world. He hasn't had horrible time when he was with Chicago these last couple of years. He had some decent numbers in the games he played with Detroit, so I don't think he's going to be a starter by any means. He's not going to be overtaking a player like Dostal, but in a backup role, I think he could do quite well for himself, and behind a player like Dostal, I think both of those guys, Czech goalies, can fuel each other, honestly. As for the trade grades, I think I do like this quite a bit more for the Anaheim Ducks than the Red Wings, just because of the risk associated with a player like Gibson, and if you'll actually be able to get back to form. Though the thing is, he's not a super old goaltender. He's just 31 years old still, so even though he feels a little bit older than that, he's still at a level where I think he can get back to form completely. We're just gonna have to wait and see. I mean, I would adore for that Detroit goaltending situation for a player like Gibson to come in and be the guy, because they have needed that type of player for a long time now. We'll just have to wait and see what happens there. But for the trade grades, just from looking out the outside, I'm going to give the Anaheim Ducks here a A-. I think they did pretty well here, all things considered. Again, 0 salary retention, getting a player like Mrazek, who I think is going to be a great mentor to a player like Dostal, and, of course, 2 decent picks. Nothing crazy, but not bad. And I think for Detroit, I'm going to give it a C+. This is, again, mostly a wait-and-see trade for them, but it could go up to a B if Gibson gets back to that complete form. I just have worries about the consistency and how likely that is to actually happen. But those are all my thoughts on the trades that we've seen, at least for NHL players throughout this NHL draft. Let me know your thoughts down below on all these deals. Which teams do you think come out on top, and what do you think of all these trades, and especially the implications for a team like Detroit and their goaltending, for a team like Ottawa and their defense? A lot to talk about, but let me know all your thoughts down below. Of course, if you guys enjoyed the little recap, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and share it with all the hockey fans you guys know online, as well as clicking on this card for all of my draft content and all my trade content, especially, right in one playlist there. And I will see you guys in the next one. Have a fantastic hockey day, and goodbye.